it's a very culturally diverse environment that we live in. And so I think we have to embrace that, and the work that's being created now has to reflect that, because I think that's important. For the arts being created now should reflect the time we live in.
That's what I would say to the Obama administration. Consider each country and its own interest and its own peculiar history in relation to the others, and be very careful, because you've got a complicated situation which could, if you aren't very careful about how you proceed, could be explosive.
Basically, at this point, what elected officials are looking at is, they don't want to ruin our water supplies either, but they're under tremendous pressure from the oil and gas industry, which is a major industry, throwing millions of dollars around in lobbying and ad campaigns.
You have no sympathy whatsoever for the Sikhs that were murdered in Wisconsin.
No, I have no personal sympathy because I didn't know any of them or anything else, and
but they were human beings, with all due respect.
Well, they would be alive human beings if they'd have stayed in the area where they come from in Asia.
The two that President Obama is going to win hands down is definitely going to be Ohio and Virginia.
Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Welcome. On April 12, 2013, the highly anticipated Hollywood film 42 opened in theaters across the country. The film depicts the story of legendary Brooklyn Dodgers player Jackie Robinson and his struggle to break into the major leagues. The movie has been praised by film critics and the general public. However, numerous sports writers, like the nation's Dave Zirin, have criticized the film for its inaccurate assessment of Robinson's life and that of Dodgers general manager and president Branch Rickey. Celebrated sports historians have also criticized the film, including Joseph Dorinson. A noted authority in the field of popular culture, Mr. Dorinson has spoken and written on the Brooklyn Dodgers, African-American sports heroes, humor studies, Russian immigration, Brooklyn and Jewish history, and World War II movies and music. His television appearances have included Fox News, NBC News, WLIW-TV in New York, and New York One News. He has been quoted in the Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Daily News, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Newark Star Ledger on such topics as ill manners in sports, nostalgia TV, the use and abuse of cell phones, the crime wave in the National Football League, and Joe DiMaggio's death. His op-ed piece on Hank Greenberg, My Hero Hank, appeared in the New York Daily News on January 15, 2000. And op-ed pieces on Jackie Robinson, Jackie's a Hero Now, but He Wasn't Always, and Paul Robeson, All-American, appeared in the New York Daily News in 1997 and 1998 respectively. He has edited and written numerous books, including the landmark Jackie Robinson, Race, Sports, and the American Dream, and has served as a professor of history at Long Island University in New York. He joins us to give his perspective on the film and an overview of the life of the man who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
My pleasure.
In honor of the late, great film critic Roger Ebert, I'll begin the conversation by asking you if 42 gets thumbs up or thumbs down overall.
I'd say thumbs up with a qualifier. I found a number of errors of fact that disturbed me as a baseball fan. Let me point them out briefly. Gene Urmansky hit left-handed, not right-handed, as in the film. Fritz Ostermuller, the bigot who in fact once got into a fistfight with Hank Greenberg over racist and anti-Semitic comments, pitched left-handed, not right-handed, as in the film. According to my research, the player who invited Jackie to take a shower with the rest of the team was not Ralph Branca, his friend, but Al Gianfrido, who came to the Dodgers in exchange for another bigot named Kirby Higbee, the South Carolinian who signed a petition against Robinson's entry into the Dodger organization. I also recall that it was Gene Hermansky who invited everyone on the team to wear 42 so that no one could shoot at Robinson, given the universality of number 42, and not Pee Wee Reese. And there were other errors, I thought, and errors of omission. I think the black writer, journalist who actually attended my conference at LRU, which I co-hosted with Dr. Urim Warman, Sam Lacey deserved mention because not only did he room with Jackie in his first year, but as a great reporter in the old Baltimore Afro-American newspaper, he did much to break the color barrier before Jackie's advent. But let me hasten to add that any picture, be it one that never got made by a friend Spike Lee, or this film, deserves credit because it keeps Jackie's legacy alive and reminds people how far we've come since the Jim Crow era. And by the way, we have a lot more to go to create a just society.
What did you find to be the most egregious mistake made in the depiction of Branch Rickey?
I thought he was elevated to near sanctification. Branch Rickey was a complex man, and he deserves a lot of credit for what he did, but his credit also turned to cash. He was a man who loved money. He was known as El Cheapo, a tightwad. Very difficult to get money out of him. One example, when he went to the Pirates, he had the greatest home run hitter in the National League in Ralph Kiner, later a fine Mets broadcaster, despite his malapropisms. And Kiner wanted a raise, and he refused to give him a raise. In fact, he threatened to trade him to the Chicago Cubs, which he eventually did. He said, I finished last with you as home run king, and I could finish last without you. So, in a sense, Branch Rickey is a more complex figure than is shown in the film. And as Bill Mardo pointed out in an essay that I published, what was he doing all those years in St. Louis, where so many great African-American ball players honed their skills with the Kansas City Monarchs, the greatest team, perhaps, arguably, in the Negro Leagues?
As I stated in the introduction, many sports writers take issue with the film for its inaccuracies, and historians, much like yourself, have attacked the film for not even mentioning the newspaper called The Daily Worker, its editor Lester Rodney, or its sports writer Bill Mardo. What role did they play specifically, and why do you suspect they were completely dismissed from the film?
I'll answer the last part of the question first. They were ignored because the Cold War still obtains. These two great writers were written out of history because of their communist affiliations. But let it be known, and that's one of the weaknesses of the film, that the film lacks historical context. Lester Rodney started the drumbeat for integration as early as 1936. In 1939, he interviewed Joe DiMaggio, and he asked him who was the most difficult pitcher he ever faced. And without batting an eyelash, he said, Satchel Paige. This was printed in the Daily Worker, and the Daily Worker was read by not only communists, like my parents, I proudly proclaim, but others. And Bill Mardo, when Lester went to war to fight for the double V, democracy abroad and social justice at home, or the end of racism at home and the defeat of fascism all over the world, Bill Mardo argued very eloquently for not only integration of baseball, but basketball and football as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Sam Lacey, another great African-American, deserves mention along with Wendell Smith. I find that it was a feel-good movie. It created a legend who already was a legend. And it didn't quite give other people credit. Happy Chandler took a heroic stand as a North Carolinian with a segregated background. He opted for integration, and he said eloquently that if blacks were good enough to fight for freedom abroad, they deserve freedom here and opportunity in America. So although the owners voted 15-1 against integration at an infamous meeting of the owners, Happy Chandler vetoed their efforts to stymie integration. Pee Wee Reese got his just due in the film, but Hank Greenberg isn't mentioned at all. Hank Greenberg was the first opponent to embrace Jackie. Hank, a Jewish American, faced the onslaught of anti-Semitism. Even teammates called him the kike and the Jaime, and one of his teammates in the minor leagues, upon meeting him, said, "Where are your horns?" which was a common stereotype, a misreading of the Bible, which translated the Hebrew for hair into horns. So, in a sense, what this film lacked, probably because of dramatic license, was historical accuracy and tribute to others, other than Branch Rickey.
I think it's logical to assume that people of all races and religions, including executives at Warner Brothers, played a crucial role in the production of this film. Some may be Jewish or have Jewish bloodline, like Harrison Ford, who played Branch Rickey. Ford's maternal grandparents, Harry Neidleman and Anna Lufschultz, were Jewish immigrants. People of the Jewish faith place great value on culture, family, their heroes, and tradition. Having said that, do you have any idea why Jewish executives at Warner Brothers would allow the legacies of Lester Rodney and Bill Mardo, whom many regard as heroes of the Jewish community, to be completely ignored?
A very good question. And that goes back to the moguls who created Hollywood. Many of them, as they became nouveau riche, forgot their roots and their heritage. They were ardent Republicans. In fact, in 1932, many supported Hoover rather than Roosevelt, a Jewish favorite. Although they did take a heroic stand at Warner Brothers during the period leading up to World War II, many were fearful that they would lose their contracts, very lucrative, I might add, to the German market. So Hitler was not mentioned in any movie until the Three Stooges began their crusade against Hitler. Even Charlie Chaplin heroically took on the fight, but he didn't name Hitler by name. He used Heinkel and turned Hitler into a dual role in which a Jewish barber had the same face. So clearly Hollywood is bent on the bottom line. And the Jewish moguls, for personal and selfish reasons, avoided the embrace of writers from the left. In fact, I did some research on an article that may be published in 1935, and I found that the writers who were Jewish tended to be left. In fact, many of them were later red-listed, or blacklisted, if you will, and they tried to organize unions among their fellow writers and actors. And the moguls were anti-union. So clearly there may have been a class divide. It should be pointed out that Jewish writers beyond the pale of the Daily Worker, like Walter Winchell, before he became a rabid McCarthyite, was a champion of integration. And Ed Sullivan, whose wife was Jewish, also trumpeted the need for a black presence in sports in his columns and later on television. So what you have here is a contradiction in our culture. And not only does race matter, but so does class. And so I think you have the combination of Cold War residue, anti-communism. Also, many Jews have been afraid of exposure. Don't make trouble. Don't make waves. Go along to get along, and vice versa. So I'm not surprised by the absence of mention. In fact, the drumbeat for getting rid of the communist writers like Howard Fast and Dalton Trumbo and Ring Lardner were people like the Warner Brothers who wanted to create an antiseptic effect, to create a Hollywood of pro-American patriots who would not allow people of the left, people who are pink. And so Lillian Hellman and Ring Lardner, who made wonderful statements on the subject, were cast aside. Until, of course, Kirk Douglas deserves a lot of credit for bringing many communist writers out of obscurity. To wit, Howard Fast in his wonderful movie Spartacus, and Dalton Trumbo, who wrote the script for that marvelous movie.
Before I proceed with the next question, I would like to note that Warner Brothers Pictures was contacted and invited to answer the question that was just posed to Mr. Dorinson and to take part in this full discussion. No one at the studio responded to my request. If they choose to do so in the future, their comments will be presented in a follow-up segment. My next question. Do you believe the communist label will keep Rodney and Mardo from being accepted, embraced, and honored by elected officials, including President Obama and the majority of people in the United States?
Another naughty question. I think that, just speaking from personal experience, when I invited these two gentlemen, along with Henry Foner and other people of the left, to come to the conference at Long Island University, where I've taught since 1966, they were resurrected. They were, in a sense, brought back from the dead, in a real sense. And Lester Rodney, in particular, was on public radio. He was on television. He was lionized. And Bill Mardo also received attention, perhaps not as much. And in fact, in the book that Rodney put together, called Press Box Red, he acknowledged the role that this conference played in bringing him back to center stage. He was written up in the New York Times. I have a number of clippings in the Daily News, and given the credit due. So I'm sanguine that eventually, and I quote the great novelist Leo Tolstoy, God sees the truth, but waits. And the truth will come out eventually. I should point out that without the communists on the city council, let me be specific, Peter V. Caccione in Brooklyn, Benjamin Davis, who was later indicted and convicted and sent to jail from a district in Harlem, they helped to pass anti-discrimination legislation. They were joined by Michael Quill, who not only was the leader of the Transit Workers Union, but he also was a city councilman on the ALP ticket. And there were others who lent their voice, and New York City had proportional representation in 1940s until the Red Scare obliterated this democratic feature. And they were able to press for a major turnaround known as the Quinn-Ives Law, which prohibited discrimination in all facets of employment throughout New York State. This is the basis for Branch Rickey's breakthrough. Without legislation initiated by communists and the so-called fellow travelers, you wouldn't have a legal basis for integration. And you mentioned Obama. If you do the math, the chronological math, Jackie breaks into baseball in 47. 7 years later, the Supreme Court unanimously outlaws segregation. 1 year later, the heroic Rosa Parks refuses to yield her seat on a bus, leads to a boycott, and brings a then obscure minister from Atlanta by way of Boston, who heroically and effectively creates a nonviolent approach, which he borrowed from Gandhi, who in turn borrowed from Thoreau, and created a change. But it was Jackie who started that ball rolling. And then in the 60s, thanks to Kennedy's initiative and Johnson's completion, you have legislation. It's the 63 and 64 Civil Rights Act. I omitted 57 under Johnson's aegis in the Senate, where you had the first civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. So step by step, it's what happened in baseball, I believe. I argue fiercely that enabled Mr. Obama to become our president.
Do you think Lester Rodney and Bill Mardo deserve to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Absolutely. And so does Marvin Miller. But notice, Miller is not there because he created a union that has raised salaries and has created a great deal of hostility among the owners. When you put a guy like O'Malley, who was, by the way, very hostile to Jackie and to Rickey, forced him out, as a matter of fact, and moved the Dodgers, the most popular team in the National League, to L.A. because of his greed. He's in the Hall of Fame, and Lester Rodney and Bill Mardo and Marvin Miller are not. Where is justice?
In referencing Bill Mardo, you mentioned his essay, which was published in your book, Jackie Robinson, Race, Sports, and the American Dream. Could you elaborate on that essay and what his intent was?
Well, his intent was to show that Rickey did not deserve premature canonization. That for many years, Rickey did nothing to alleviate this injustice, to eliminate this disgrace. And when he moved to Brooklyn, and here's my thesis, Brooklyn was the best and only place for this monumental, historic, noble experiment because of its multicultural history, because it was working class, middle class, because it had a very supportive Jewish population privy to the insults and the injuries of minority group status, who could identify. I want to mention one thing. When I went to the games in the 40s, Jewish fans yelled, Yankel, Yankel, which is the Yiddish for Jackie. They made him one of their own, and he was indeed our hero. And that should be mentioned, that it was Jewish writers, as well as black writers, who trumpeted the call for social justice. And to have them in the Hall of Fame is something that they richly earned.
And in terms of their legacies, Bill Mardo and Lester Rodney, that is there anything or anyone that you'd like to address specifically?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for keeping their legacy alive, because there are not too many journalists who are willing to take risks and be called a red or a pinko. Both of them are with honor, having lived through the McCarthy era and the fear and trembling that attended that era of infamy. It's important to note that not all communists were slaves of the propaganda machine generated through Stalin's Comintern. People like my parents were working class who wanted a better life for their children, for their families. They wanted justice across racial, ethnic, and gender lines. My students often come from the old Soviet Union, and they are terrific students. They were grounded in the fundamentals. They honored their teachers. The same is true of my Chinese students, some of whom came from mainland China, Red China, and they have a traditional value placed on education. They were doing something right with all the errors committed in the name of Comrade Stalin and Comrade Mao. I mean, we have to be open-minded about why we are failing in the educational process, and other systems, albeit so-called totalitarian, have done a better job in educating youth, in giving them the prerequisites for success in society. So I think journalists like you, and we lost a great journalist 2 weeks ago, and Stan Isaacs. Stan Isaacs wrote for the Compass, a newspaper that emerged from the PM, a left-wing newspaper, which, surprisingly, took no advertisement. And he covered the Dodgers. Stan Isaacs was a great admirer of Lester Rodney. When Rodney came to Brooklyn to deliver his address along with Bill Mardo, Rodney stayed in the home of Stan Isaacs. And Stan Isaacs wrote about Rodney, as did other writers for the Times, for Newsday, for the Daily News. To me, this was vindication. As someone who was marked red, who suffered many personal defeats because my parents were known as Reds, including an American Legion medal I won on merit in 1951, but was denied that medal. I felt the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune brought on by the Cold War. So to me, to see Lester and Bill honored was a vindication of my family, my parents, who were no longer alive. So to repeat my mantra, God sees the truth but waits. And I believe ultimately, thanks to your efforts and the efforts of others who are willing to take risks, we will see justice done. Justice delayed is not justice denied.
And finally, how can people reach you for lectures or information on your articles and books?
I've switched in a way to humor, and I do lectures on political humor, which are sponsored by the New York Council for the Humanities. Unfortunately, during sequestration, their budgets have been cut. So what we need to do is to refinance the arts and public radio and public television and programs like yours. And as a former member of a local school board, I recall with pain that the first items cut in the budget were items pertaining to art, music, and culture. This is not the way to go to create a better society, a better future for our children. I'm available at LIU. I offer my services to preach the gospel. I am doing this right now because, to me, Jackie Robinson and Rachel Robinson, we haven't mentioned, are keeping the flame alive. Rachel was pleased with the movie, and rightly so. It's a wonderful tribute to her husband. And Rachel is the bedrock. She was the one who kept that flame burning and did things, sent children, bright children from the inner city to colleges. And I've contributed, and I continue to contribute to the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Unfortunately, the building has not been finished in which the Jackie Robinson Foundation will be housed. It should be a museum. It should be something that children in schools throughout the city and the metropolitan area come to and make a pilgrimage, because Jackie is not only an icon, he's a man for all seasons. And especially in this season, in the spring of our discontent, he belongs not only in the Hall of Fame, but in our hearts and minds forever and ever.
You mentioned LIU. Is there a direct number where you can be reached, or an email?
Yes, I have an email, jdorinso, without the N, at liu.edu, or my telephone number, which I answer directly, 488-488-1191. And can I reverse the query? How can people reach you, and how can they access your programs?
Wow, you kind of caught me off guard there, sir. No one's ever actually turned the tables and asked me a question. But, in answer to your question, anyone looking to access my work can simply do so by logging onto YouTube and typing in the search box Gary, G-A-R-Y, my middle name, G-L-E-N-N-E-L-L, and my last name is Toms, T-O-M-S. And feel free to review my catalog of work. That said, the insight and knowledge you provided are invaluable, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time to be here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and I salute your efforts. Carry on.
If you have an inspirational story or an issue that you feel should be brought to the public's attention, you can email me at fromthegman@gmail.com. Maybe you'll be featured in an upcoming edition of the G-Man Interviews. I'm the G-Man, and until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.